Why you don't fit in anymore. Carl Jung. There is a moment in every serious person's life when the world they once belonged to begins to feel foreign. The conversations that used to energize you now feel hollow. The people you once called your tribe now seem like strangers speaking a language you no longer fluently speak. The parties, the gossip, the petty ambitions, the need to be liked at all costs, none of it stirs anything in you anymore. And instead of feeling relieved, you feel afraid. You start to wonder, what is wrong with me? Why can't I just be normal? If that is where you are right now, I want you to stop and breathe, because what you are experiencing is not a breakdown. It is not depression, and it is not social failure. According to one of the most profound psychological minds who ever lived, Carl Gustav Jung, what you are experiencing is one of the most important transformations a human being can undergo. You are not falling apart. You are waking up. Before we go any further, if this kind of deep psychological and philosophical content speaks to your soul, do yourself a favor right now and subscribe to this channel. Every week, we go beneath the surface of who you are and who you are becoming. Hit that subscribe button and join a community of people who choose depth over distraction. The persona and the price you paid to wear it. Carl Jung introduced the world to a concept he called the persona, the social mask every human being constructs in order to survive in society. The word itself comes from the ancient Greek theatrical tradition, where actors wore literal masks to signal to audiences what role they were playing. Jung borrowed this image deliberately, because he understood that human beings do exactly the same thing, not on a stage, but in life itself. From the time you were a child, you began assembling your persona. You learned which version of yourself made your parents smile and which version made them frown. You discovered what made classmates include you or exclude you. You absorbed the unspoken rules of your culture, your religion, your neighborhood, and you shaped yourself accordingly. You became, in the truest sense, a product of other people's expectations. And for a long time, this worked. The persona is not evil. It is a survival tool. It gives you social traction. It lets you function in a world that demands conformity in 1,000 subtle ways. But here is what Jung understood that most people never come to terms with. The persona is not you. It is the costume, not the body wearing it, and eventually, if you are lucky, if life has been honest enough with you, the costume begins to feel suffocating. The mask starts to itch. And one day, without warning, you look in the mirror and the face staring back at you feels like a stranger's. That is not a crisis. That is the beginning of a reckoning. Individuation. The call no one teaches you to expect. Jung spent his life developing the concept of individuation, the psychological process by which a person moves from being a reflection of collective expectations to becoming a genuinely whole and differentiated self. It is the journey from mask to face, from echo to original voice, from borrowed identity to authentic existence. And here is what makes individuation so disorienting when it begins. Nobody warns you it is coming. Society prepares you extensively for conformity. Schools teach you how to fit into systems. Religions often teach you which rules to follow. Social media trains you to curate an image for external approval. But no institution, no teacher, no cultural script prepares you for the moment when all of those external blueprints stop satisfying you. No one tells you that the very success of your socialization, the fact that you build a functional persona, will one day create a crisis, because the self underneath that persona will refuse to stay silent forever. When individuation begins, you stop fitting in, not because you have become broken, but because you have become too alive for the roles that once contained you. The discomfort is not pathology. It is a sign that something ancient and real inside you is pressing against the surface of the constructed life you have been living, demanding to be seen. Sign 1. Silence feels better than small talk. One of the earliest and most disorienting signs that individuation is underway is a deep, growing inability to tolerate shallow conversation. You find yourself in social settings where everyone is talking, and yet you feel profoundly alone. Not because you are antisocial, not because you are better than anyone, but because your inner world has expanded to a point where conversations about surface things, celebrity gossip, office politics, who said what to whom, feel like eating cardboard when your soul is hungry for a real meal. Jung understood that as the psyche deepens, the threshold for meaningful exchange rises. You begin to crave conversations about real things, about meaning, about suffering, about what it actually feels like to be alive. You want to talk about fear, about regret, about what keeps people up at 3 in the morning. And when you find yourself surrounded by people who only want to talk about appearances, you do not feel superior, you feel stranded. This is not arrogance. This is a sign that your soul has grown. Silence begins to feel less like loneliness and more like sanctuary. And the people around you, who once defined you, start to sense that something has shifted, even if they cannot name it. This is the beginning of your differentiation. Sign 2. You can no longer perform happiness. There was a time when you were skilled at performing contentment. You knew how to laugh at the right moments, to say the right things, to project the image of someone who was fine. Fine at work, fine in relationships, fine with the version of your life that looked acceptable from the outside. And the performance was not malicious, it was survival. It was what you had been trained to do, but now, the performance has broken down. You find it increasingly exhausting to pretend that things are fine when they are not. You find it harder to smile on command, to celebrate outcomes that feel hollow, to attend events that leave you emptier than when you arrived. And this breakdown of your capacity to perform is not weakness, it is honesty fighting its way back to the surface. Jung believed that the psyche has a relentless drive toward wholeness. And wholeness requires truth. The parts of yourself that you buried, your real feelings, your real desires, your real pain, do not disappear simply because you learn to smile over them. They accumulate, they grow heavy, and eventually, they demand expression. When you can no longer perform happiness convincingly, it is because your authentic self has grown too strong to be silenced by the social actor you once were. This is not dysfunction. This is healing. Sign 3. Old relationships begin to feel hollow. This is perhaps the most painful dimension of the individuation process, and it is one that Jung addressed with great honesty and compassion. As you deepen, some relationships that once felt essential will begin to feel hollow, not because those people have changed, but because you have. This does not mean those people are bad. Many of them are good people, kind people, people who love you in the only way they know how. But there is a specific kind of loneliness that comes when you realize you have outgrown a relationship, not in terms of achievement or status, but in terms of psychological and spiritual depth. You try to bring them into your inner world and they look at you blankly. You share something that feels urgent and real to you, and they respond with discomfort or dismissal. And the gap between you widens, not through conflict, but through silence. Jung described this as an inevitable consequence of genuine growth. Every relationship is, in some sense, a contract between two people at a particular stage of their development. When one person grows significantly and the other does not, or grows in a different direction, the original contract becomes obsolete. And renegotiating that contract, or letting it dissolve, is one of the most courageous things a human being can do. Staying in relationships that require you to stay small is not loyalty. It is self-erasure. Sign 4. You are haunted by a sense of unlived life. Jung coined one of the most haunting phrases in all of depth psychology, the unlived life. He observed that many of his patients did not suffer primarily from what had happened to them, but from what had never been allowed to happen. The dreams deferred, the creative urges suppressed, the authentic desires dismissed as impractical or irresponsible. When individuation begins, the unlived life stops being a quiet background ache and becomes an urgent, pressing confrontation. You begin to feel, with increasing intensity, the weight of everything you have not done, not said, not become. The painting you never started. The book you never wrote. The relationship you never pursued because it seemed too risky. The career you abandoned because someone told you it was unrealistic. The person you were becoming before the world talked you out of it. This haunting is not nostalgia. It is a summons. The psyche is drawing your attention to the gap between who you have been performing and who you were always meant to become. And the pain of that gap, the grief of the unlived life, is one of the most powerful catalysts for transformation that exists. Jung believed that the second half of life, in particular, was meant to be devoted to recovering and living out what was left behind in the first half. If you are feeling this ache, you are not too late. You are exactly on time. If these ideas are landing in you, if you are nodding along because this is describing your life right now, then this channel was built for you. Subscribe right now. We release new content regularly that will help you understand not just the psychology of who you are becoming, but the philosophy that can guide you through the transformation. Subscribe. You will not regret it. The shadow, the part of you that you abandoned. No discussion of Jung's ideas is complete without confronting the concept of the shadow, and it is particularly relevant to the experience of not fitting in. Jung defined the shadow as the unconscious repository of everything you have rejected, repressed, or refused to acknowledge about yourself. Every time you were told as a child that a particular emotion was wrong, you pushed it into the shadow. Every time you suppressed a desire because it conflicted with who you were supposed to be, it went into the shadow. Every quality you deemed unacceptable, your anger, your ambition, your sexuality, your sorrow, your wildness, lives in the shadow. Here is the paradox. The shadow is not your enemy. It is the part of you that society could not afford to let you express, so it was driven underground. And everything that goes underground does not disappear, it accumulates power. The shadow exerts its influence through your projections, your triggers, your irrational reactions, your inexplicable attractions and repulsion. The people who irritate you most are almost always showing you something you have buried in yourself. When you begin to feel that you no longer fit into your social world, a significant reason is often this: you are beginning to reclaim your shadow. The qualities you spent years suppressing, your willingness to disagree, your refusal to pretend, your need for solitude, your passionate intensity, are coming back online. And a world built around your old, compliant self will not comfortably accommodate the fuller, more honest, more complex version of you that is emerging. That tension is not a warning sign. It is a birth announcement. Why fitting in was never the goal. The modern world is deeply invested in the idea of fitting in. Social media has constructed an entire architecture of belonging that rewards conformity with likes, followers, and validation. The pressure to curate an acceptable, digestible, shareable version of yourself has never been more intense. And the psychological cost of this pressure, which Jung could not have anticipated but would have immediately understood, has never been higher. Jung lived and wrote in an era where the pressure to conform came primarily from family, church, and community. Today, those pressures are amplified by algorithms that reward sameness, platforms that punish authenticity, and a culture of comparison that turns your deepest wounds into content for other people's entertainment. In such an environment, the act of stepping out of conformity, of refusing to perform, of choosing depth over approval, is not merely a personal choice. It is a psychological act of resistance. Jung argued that the goal of human life is not happiness in the conventional sense, not comfort, not social approval, not the absence of suffering. The goal is wholeness, and wholeness is impossible as long as you are organizing your life around the approval of others. The moment you begin to prioritize your own psychological truth over social acceptance, you will inevitably stop fitting in, and that is the precise moment when you begin to truly live. The loneliness that is actually liberation. There is a particular kind of loneliness that accompanies genuine individuation, and it is important to name it clearly so that you do not mistake it for failure. It is not the loneliness of rejection, though it can feel like that. It is not the loneliness of someone who has failed to connect, though the isolation can be just as acute. It is the loneliness of the pioneer, the person who has moved beyond the familiar territory of collective identity and has not yet found the tribe that inhabits the new territory they are entering. Jung described this transitional space as one of the most dangerous and essential phases of psychological development. Dangerous because the temptation to retreat, to go back to the persona, to the performance, to the comfortable hollowness of fitting in, is enormous. Essential because it is only by enduring this loneliness, by refusing to fill it with distraction or false belonging, that a person can complete the transition into genuine selfhood. The loneliness you feel when you no longer fit in is the loneliness of someone who is becoming. It is the loneliness of the seed underground, before the shoot breaks through the soil. It has direction. It has purpose. It is not permanent, but it requires something from you that comfort can never require. It requires that you trust the process even when the process feels like loss. What Jung said about the second half of life. Jung made a distinction that very few psychologists before or since have taken seriously enough: the distinction between the first and second halves of life. In the first half, he argued, the task of the psyche is fundamentally outward, to establish identity, to build a life, to achieve the goals that society sets before you. Career, family, status, security. These are not trivial pursuits. They are the scaffolding of a functional adult existence. But Jung observed that for many people, particularly those who had successfully built that scaffolding, a moment came, often in midlife but sometimes earlier or later, when the scaffolding stopped feeling like a foundation and started feeling like a cage. The success they had worked so hard for felt hollow. The relationships they had carefully constructed felt obligatory. The identity they had assembled with such effort felt foreign. And this moment, which modern culture pathologizes as a midlife crisis, Jung understood as an invitation. The invitation is to turn inward, to stop building the outward life and begin excavating the inner one. To ask not what does the world want from me, but what does my own deepest nature demand of me. This transition is precisely what makes people stop fitting in. Because the world was designed for the first half of life, for outward achievement, social performance, and collective belonging. The second half of life has no cultural container, no social script, no pre-approved pathway. You have to build the path as you walk it, and that is terrifying. And that is also the most alive you will ever feel. Reclaiming the self that was left behind. One of Jung's most powerful clinical observations was that the self a person abandons in childhood, the authentic, unedited, wild, curious, sensitive, fierce self that existed before socialization compressed it, does not die. It waits. It waits with extraordinary patience, in the depths of the unconscious, for the day when the constructed self grows tired enough, honest enough, or courageous enough to let it return. This is why so many people who are undergoing genuine psychological transformation find themselves drawn back to things they loved as children: art, nature, solitude, storytelling, movement, music. These are not regressions. They are retrievals. The psyche is guiding you back to the thread of your own authenticity that was dropped somewhere along the road to being acceptable. When you begin this retrieval, you will feel strange. The people around you will often feel it too, and not always in comfortable ways. They were accustomed to the persona. They built their relationship with you around the mask. When the mask begins to come off, it can feel threatening to people who are not engaged in their own individuation, because your authenticity implicitly asks them to confront their own inauthenticity. And that is not a confrontation everyone is ready for. But that is not your responsibility to manage. Your responsibility is to the self that is returning. The courage of not fitting in. There is a reason why so few people complete the individuation process. It is not because it is intellectually difficult, it is because it is emotionally and socially costly. To stop fitting in is to risk the disapproval of people whose approval you were trained from childhood to seek. It is to risk the label of strange, difficult, arrogant, unstable, too much. It is to sit with the loneliness of the frontier without any guarantee that you will find your people on the other side. Jung was clear-eyed about this cost. He did not romanticize individuation as a gentle unfolding of beauty. He described it as a confrontation with the shadow, with the persona, with the collective, with all the parts of yourself you would rather not see. It requires what he called moral courage, not the courage of the battlefield, but the quieter, more sustained courage of the person who chooses truth over comfort, depth over approval, wholeness over belonging. And here is what makes it worth it. On the other side of this confrontation, Jung observed, is a quality of life that simply cannot be accessed any other way. Not happiness in the shallow sense, but something far more durable, a sense of rightness, of alignment, of being genuinely at home inside your own existence. The people who have walked this path describe it with a consistency that is striking. Not that life became easy, but that it became real. And reality, even difficult reality, is infinitely more nourishing than the most comfortable performance. Finding your real tribe. Here is the truth that Jung's work points toward, and that every person who has genuinely walked this path eventually discovers. There are others like you. Not many, not everywhere, not easy to find. But they exist. The people who have refused the performance, who have chosen depth over approval, who have endured the loneliness of not fitting in because they could not bring themselves to fit into a life that felt false, they are out there. And the paradox is this: you will only find them after you stop looking for approval from the people around you. As long as you are managing your image, performing your persona, staying small to stay acceptable, you are invisible to your real tribe, because you are presenting yourself as someone you are not. It is only when you begin to show up as the person you actually are, uncertain, searching, serious, alive, that the people who are genuinely compatible with your soul can recognize you. Jung believed that the deepest human connection was not built on similarity of background, or status, or shared opinion. It was built on similarity of depth. When two people have each done the work of facing themselves honestly, the connection between them carries a quality of recognition that is unlike anything possible between two people who are still living behind their masks. Not fitting in is the price of admission to that kind of connection. And it is worth every uncomfortable moment of the journey. You are not too late. If you are reading this and you are afraid that you have waited too long, that too many years have passed in the performance of a life that was never fully yours, I want to offer you what Jung's entire body of work offers, a radical refusal of the idea that it is ever too late to begin. Jung himself underwent one of the most profound personal transformations of his life in his late 30s and 40s, following his break with Sigmund Freud. During that period, he descended into what he later called a confrontation with the unconscious, a years-long journey into the depths of his own psyche, documented in what became the Red Book. He emerged from that confrontation with the framework that would define the rest of his life's work. And he was not a young man when it happened. The psyche does not operate on a social timeline. It operates on its own terms, at its own pace, according to its own wisdom. The fact that you are feeling the pull toward authenticity, the discomfort of the mask, the ache of the unlived life, the inability to keep performing, means that the invitation has arrived. Not too early, not too late. Now, and the only question that matters is whether you will answer it. If this video spoke to something real in you, if it put language around an experience you have been living but could not name, then I want to personally invite you to become a permanent member of this community. Subscribe to this channel right now. Every week, we bring you content that goes into the depths of philosophy, psychology, and human transformation. Content designed not to entertain, but to genuinely change the way you see yourself and your life. Subscribe, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment below telling us, where are you in this process? What has not fitting in cost you, and what has it given you? Your words matter here. We read every single one. Carl Jung once wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Not who your parents needed you to be, not who your culture rewarded you for being, not the character in the story everyone around you agreed to tell about you. Who you truly are, the self that was there before the world got its hands on you, and that has been waiting, with extraordinary patience, for you to come back. You do not fit in anymore. And that is not the end of something. That is the beginning of everything. The loneliness is real, the cost is real, and the life waiting on the other side of that cost is more real than anything you have ever performed. You are not broken, you are becoming, and that makes all the difference. Subscribe for more content on Stoic philosophy, Jungian psychology, and the journey toward a life of genuine depth and meaning.